Welcome to Something Positive for Positive People. I'm Courtney Brain. Something Positive for Positive People is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that serves as essentially a self-help resource for people who are navigating herpes stigma. If you visit www.spfpp.org, you will also find that there are other support resources to help people with navigating herpes stigma. Today, we are bringing back a previous guest that we've had on, Nina.
Hello.
And we're going to talk about a topic that I don't think has been discussed on Something Positive for Positive People in too much detail, which is grief. Not just grief in the sense of, and if you've listened to the breakup podcast episode, then you'll know that there's so much more to grief than just someone died, they're not here anymore, this is grief. There's a lot more components to it. You can go and check out that episode if you want. But what we're going to talk about today is grief in relation to sexuality, taking from as much of Nina's experience as you're willing to share here today. I think that where we should begin is, when did you realize that grief was something prevalent in relation to your sexuality, herpes diagnosis? Let's start there.
Yeah, so things are a little bit more complicated for me because I also have health conditions that affect my sexuality in addition to just herpes. I am someone who does experience chronic pain with sex, and that has been the case for me for the past decade, and has had its own journey as well. But I think two parts of the grief experience and having herpes that we might not discuss is one, the grief of sort of how we used to move through the world as a sexual being, right? Because the script has changed a little bit for us, and I think that if we're talking about hookup culture and dating, there is definitely a grief of how we are able to interact with that. And I think there's some body grief in there too.
When you say 10 years ago, um, that is that when your pain started?
Yeah, approximately 10 years ago, yeah.
Was there a particular event that occurred?
It was not, it was gradual in onset.
Ah.
It took a lot of figuring out. I don't actually know if I have it all figured out, though I've eliminated a lot of things. But yeah, it's been a journey, and that's when it first started happening for me, and it started out gradual and became more and more intense.
Hmm. And in the beginning, or not the beginning, but when it got to that point 10 years ago, is that when you began to seek out answers?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it wasn't just sex. It was also, I was a power lifter. And it was also when I was lifting very heavy. Um, so those were the 2 points where my pain started.
So I didn't even know you had that part of your life. I didn't know about the powerlifting. I found out about your previous careers and all types of stuff. But okay, so you had lifestyle changes
Mm.
throughout, since at least finding out about your pain and starting to look for answers. What were some of the beginning changes that you were making?
Well, I already had a pretty strict lifestyle, because I was also, prior to that, experienced chronic pain in other areas of my body. Um, but I, as that pain started increasing, I really shut down. I really shut down when it came to dating, when it came to sex, like everything. Like looking back, I feel like I denied myself a lot of experiences. And even now, I think I deny myself a lot of experiences. It's almost like, and I was describing this to someone that I was on a date with a couple of days ago. I was like, you ever feel like you have a pair of pants or like an outfit that you want to put on, but it doesn't really fit you well anymore? And you're like, keep it in your closet. And you're like, when I'm feeling, better in my body again, I'll wear that, and sometimes the best thing that you can do is just let it go and buy a new outfit, you know what I mean? And move on with your life. So I felt like it was kind of like that, right? Like I was like, when I get better or when I figure this out. And the thing is that I've come now into some of my diagnoses and learning more about what is actually going on with me is that, this is actually something I'm going to have to manage and deal with for the rest of my life. But it was like I shut down. I was, if we're talking about stages of grief, the first stage is denial, right? Like, this isn't actually going to be forever for me. This isn't actually happening to me, And I think we can feel the same thing with a herpes diagnosis, It's like avoidance.
While we're talking about the stages of grief, can we go ahead and go through those and use your experience with your body as like the example that we have? Like, what does denial, anger, and the rest of the stages look like?
So the stages, like I'm going to say them in an order, but it doesn't actually always happen in order. Like, things aren't linear, but there's grief, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I think that what mental health does, and I have a master's in mental health counseling, I think that one of the pitfalls of traditional Western mental health is that everything is lined up so linear, and it really isn't. We're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Again, like you said, the grief isn't just getting over someone's passing. Sometimes we have grief with things we live with that we have to deal with, all the time. And not to say that people who are grieving someone who passed isn't always living with that, but particularly like if you have herpes and you get reoccurring outbreaks, you might go through the same thing every time that you have an outbreak. And it felt similar to me. I really stayed in the denial and anger stage for a while, and I think that I did a lot of bargaining, and that was really me and the medical model. Bargaining. Who's going to help me? Who's going to fix this? Where's the answer? Where's that, where's the solution? And I'm really just now, after this 10 years, coming into a little bit more acceptance. And even that's hard. I still find myself going back into denial and anger. And I think it's the same way with, like, having a herpes diagnosis. So I arrived at my herpes diagnosis, at least HSV2, genital herpes, maybe about 2.5 years ago. So that was a whole nother way to start that process again. It's like, oh, I had chronic pain with sex and now I have herpes too. Like, what a disclosure statement, I have to give at the beginning of all this.
Where does hope fall into this?
Oh man, hope. That's a really good question.
Here's where that's coming from for me, because as you mentioned, the denial, who's going to save me? I think that specifically with a herpes diagnosis, I think people hope for a cure so that they can deny, what happened or whatever the emotions are that came up from their diagnosis, and they can avoid the anger and the feelings, and avoid or put off the need for acceptance. Like, that's what I see. And I think about having been positive now for 10 years, if I would have just hoped for a cure 10 years ago, I'd have looked up 10 years would have gone by, and I'd be exactly
absolutely
where I am. So to me, hope in an instance like this is sort of staggering your own ability to go through the healing process. So that's where that's coming from.
Yeah. I hear that. And yes, I know, like, same for me. Like, I'm sitting around hoping for a cure for my chronic pain, and it doesn't exist. And that's one thing that I think that we have to sort of negotiate, is what is realistic to be hopeful about. Why are we hoping for a cure instead of hoping for having a good relationship? And I think that first off, we can just scratch the cure idea, because we're definitely going to get a vaccine before we would ever get a cure. So like, that's not where your hope should lie. And you can hope that other people get a vaccine, right? That's a little bit easier. What's lighter? So let's think a little bit about baby steps. What is hope? If you're hoping for some big, giant, like mythical thing, that maybe isn't, I don't want to say productive hope, but maybe that's not where your efforts are best lied. So if we start small, can I hope for a successful date? Can I hope for a confident disclosure? Can I hope for, right? What is realistic for us to hope about? What is within our reach? What is within our control? Because a cure for herpes is not within our control. It's absolutely not. What is? And that's our perspective. So if we can shift our perspective in something that's manageable, something that's achievable, something that we can actually touch, we can actually influence. I think that's where hope is more productive.
Lately, I've been making an effort to not say I hope, and reframe my energy that I put into hoping into believing. I feel like belief is something more aligned with what my behaviors are. Like, I believe that I am capable of doing this. Like, if I were to believe that I can make a cure myself, it would be because I have some sort of like science background, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't believe that because I don't have that experience, right? What I'm hearing in how we talk about hope and making sure that it's something that we can be responsible for, it really makes me think about a lot of the people that I speak to. And anyone who might be newly listening to this, please understand that while from the CDC's website, 87% of people who do have herpes don't know that they have herpes, which leaves 13% of people who do know that they have herpes. Of that 13% of the population that do have herpes, I hear from a very small amount of those people. And these are the people who are often looking for resources because they're not in a good place. I don't want people to think that everyone who has herpes is suffering or having the same level of intensity of challenges navigating the stigma. I think that the big difference is that the people who are living their lives with herpes have something bigger that they're focused on than herpes, and choose not to give any power to it, or it's just not something that they've had to deal with, versus the people who might be newly diagnosed, newly back entering the dating world, fresh off of a rejection, and just having to learn how to navigate this space. So I wanted to preface that with this statement. I think that the people that I speak to most are looking for some type of alleviation from the responsibility of control. And what I mean by that is that's what hope does. Someone who might have cheated on their significant other, tested positive for herpes, and now, regrets that decision, may be raising all hell for a cure so that they can alleviate the responsibility of the outcome that came as a result of them cheating. But the problem isn't herpes. The problem is you cheated and are holding on to this, not wanting to tell your partner, right? I see a lot of that in different ways. So I hope that lengthy ass explanation kind of paints a picture for what hoping does, in the sense of, it's not like, what are you doing in addition to hoping?
Okay, but is that hope or is that avoiding shame?
Are they different?
I think they are.
Talk to me.
So hope is something you feel good about, right? If you're hoping for, a cure so you don't have to, tell your partner you cheated or whatever, right? Which I don't really have cheating experience, so I don't know if I'm speaking to this on a level of knowledge in that sense, but like that is avoidance of shame, right? Shame drives so much of our behavior and so much of our culture. We probably talked about this on the last time that I was on the podcast, but shame is a we do terrible things based on shame. We do terrible things based on fear. Hope shouldn't be based necessarily on fear. Is my hope based off of fear, or is my hope based off of contentment? Is my hope based off of feeling good instead of fear? Can we be driven by, and this is not to be taken religiously, but can we be driven off of faith and not fear? Hope is driven off more faith-based rather than fear.
So when we look at hope, faith, we're gearing toward a positive that isn't, it's like running towards something versus running from something. Is your hope running away in avoidance, or is your hope running towards, the direction of a desired outcome? I think that's probably a good way of putting that.
Yeah.
And it comes back down to control. When we think about where we do and don't have control in our lives, sex tends to be a place where we feel a sense of control, and we can either exert that control, surrender that control. And when we look at having a herpes diagnosis, how that now changes our idea of control, because now we may not have as much control as we think over our sexual partners. We may not be able, or over our choice of sexual partners. Let me reword that. We don't have the control that we may have had over.
So that's very interesting, because control is an illusion. We don't have control over really anything. Our environment, we have control over maybe our reactions sometimes, but sometimes we don't. Control is an illusion, right? Control over our bodies, right? It's people out there looking for that, take this pill and, you'll be cured. You know what I mean? It's like, you don't have control over your body. That's the one thing that one major thing I've learned in my past 10 years is that I don't have control over my body. I never will. No one is escaping aging, sickness, and death, whether you have herpes or not. So eventually you're going to lose control, and eventually you're going to lose control of your mind too. Once you start getting older, and then eventually you'll die, and then that's it, Control is an illusion. And I think it's really interesting in the dynamic of sex, because I think that's very much an illusion.
Sex is an illusion?
No, the idea of control in sex is an illusion. Right?
As you speak, I think what I should use instead of the word control should be choice.
Okay.
So if we replace control with choice, we feel like our options are limited and we can't choose like we may have before our diagnosis, right?
Maybe, but the thing is you can still choose however you want to choose. It's the other person who may or may not choose.
Right. So I don't think that a lot of us see it that way. It's like, I don't have choice anymore. I want that pretty, sexy person, and that's who I want to have sex with. But they're not going to want to have sex with me because I have herpes.
Well, too bad sex is consensual.
Now, what does that do for choice? What is that doing for us? I think there's something here that can be useful. When I think about having received my diagnosis, I can speak from my own experience here. Getting my diagnosis, I know that I would be attracted to someone, and I would want to engage in some kind of way and express interest. But I would choose to not do that because of feeling like my choice is not like I can't, because I won't be able to get that. I won't be able to get this person. I won't be able to be with this person because they're not going to want to be with me because of my herpes status.
Right. So I'll take that back to grief.
Okay.
And consider that the bargaining. right? Should I choose this person? Should I not choose to disclose this person? Should I make the move? Should I not make the move? You know what I mean? But the thing is that nothing actually has changed in that aspect. And is it choice that's changed? I mean, everybody has consent and they have the right to change their mind at any time within the process, at any time. No one is owing anybody anything ever, especially when it comes to sex, right? So there's this, are we choosing our partners? Our partners also have to choose us, right? And that's, I think, where we're talking about we can bring grief back in, because if we're talking about hookup culture and all of that, it's like, oh, I don't have as many choices because of, I can't just go out and hook up with someone without disclosing and them having to make an informed decision, right? So that's the denial, the anger coming in, right? That's the bargaining, you know what I mean? Like, what are we doing except for maybe making better choices now and actually allowing other people to choose us? Whereas before, maybe we weren't as aware of the choice of the other person, right? Now we actually have to be aware of the other person's choice to meet us there.
Yeah. And this is where you said something, I don't remember what it was, but it was about hookup culture. And maybe I did say this out loud when we were talking yesterday, actually. It might not have been yesterday. I don't know when it was, but there was a mention about hookup culture, and whatever it was made me think about the like how transactional it appears to be, and the absence of this practice of vulnerability and really connecting with people. It's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to express emotion. It's hard to put yourself out there for something more than what the general consensus right now being hookup culture, right? So if you're someone who wants a relationship and you want to be monogamous and you want commitment and you want to commit to someone and have them committed to you as well, that is a very hard thing to ask for in hookup culture. But like, that's where the majority of dating, it's like I'm picturing, I wish I could like paint pictures very well, but I'm picturing like a sphere that is hookup culture, and like a smaller sphere, maybe in a different color, of relationships. And what do relationships look like how do you get into a relationship while navigating hookup culture as well?
So that's what I think is interesting, because guess what? Everybody has a relationship. You and I have a relationship. I have a relationship with the barista who just made my coffee. I think that it's really interesting that we use the term relationship in such a way, because guess what? Like, we have a relationship. You have a relationship to everything around you. Now, how you define that relationship might be different, right? I remember I dated someone and we were having sex for like 9 months, and they were like, oh no, we don't have a relationship. I'm like, bro, like, we've been fucking for 9 months. Like, pretty sure this is a relationship. It may be a non-monogamous relationship or, a casual relationship, but it's a relationship. And he wasn't able to admit that. And I was like, okay, sorry, we're done.
And there's that avoidance. And it seems like this avoidance from hookup culture has defined dating and relationships, or relationships being what they have been historically, have brought about this offspring that is now dating culture, or hookup culture, that has expanded into what it is. And I hear a lot of people have issues or struggles dating, like people who've been in a relationship. Now I want to like word it differently.
Yeah, no, because people have been in a serious relationship or committed relationship. Okay. Committed doesn't have to mean
I know,
monogamous.
And now the more that I think it, everything that I want to say in reference to relationship is like, well, everybody has a relationship, because that is the case. But we've gotten to a point of like avoiding even the use of the word in its natural context.
That's why we feel so lonely.
Yeah, we're so far disconnected from people.
Seeing the connections we have.
Yes.
So what I think that we're actually getting at is the intimacy. And what is intimacy? And so a part of the way relationships tend to happen now, and I'm queer, so mostly what I'm talking about, I want to specify, is heteronormative dating, okay? Because queer dating is a little bit different. And I actually think there's less herpes stigma. However, I think we're talking about intimacy because what a lot of people, well, a lot of what is socially scripted now is that we have sex and then we see if we want a relationship, we want a serious relationship, right? Like a relationship is going to come from us having sex regularly. And that is sort of like a misconception because how many, especially ladies out there, have been having sex with someone for quite a long time, and then you realize that they don't even consider you this in the same way that you considered them, right? We're not having check-ins about the relationship. We might have check-ins about sex, but are you having check-ins about the relationship? And what is intimacy? And a lot of people mistake it's a lot easier to consider physical intimacy. It's an easier way for us to breach because it's like happening right then and there. And there's a big mistake in like that conception because sex doesn't have to be intimate and often isn't. It can be for one partner and not the other. Intimacy is more than just sex. You can have sex without intimacy.
And you can have intimacy without sex.
And you can have intimacy without sex. Exactly. So what is it that you want? Are you having sex because you want intimacy? And is that truly what your partner is experiencing as well? Are we talking about that? Not really. At least not from, what I hear and my experiences. So what we really crave is intimacy, but it feels so foreign for us to get to the point of talking about it, right? Like with disclosing, that provides a level of vulnerability and intimacy. You have to have vulnerability to have intimacy. And people are avoiding that vulnerability, right? And we are forced as people who disclose, and I'm saying people who disclose because not everybody who has herpes discloses. As people who disclose, we are breaking that social script of avoiding intimacy. And so then sex becomes intimate already, when before it didn't have to be. And that's something that we have to grieve too, is like we are being forced to change the social script by being people who disclose, right? And that is what we're grieving. We're grieving the fact that we don't fit in to that generalized social script that everybody can just go out and do. But the thing is, the social scripts suck. They suck. They limit us.
Before we continue further, can we stay where we're at for a minute?
Okay.
Because I think that that's a fucking message. We look at having herpes and disclosure as a burden because we're the ones who have to do this hard thing and initiate for emotional intimacy and disclose this very vulnerable, sometimes re-triggering piece of information and share that with someone and run the risk of them not validating our experience or not meeting us with what it is that we need and potentially making us feel even worse about the situation. But what you just said is that we are literally changing the game when it comes to intimacy because we're changing the dating game script in general because we are introducing intimacy prior to sex.
Yeah.
And if that other person is like uncomfortable with it, then maybe they're just uncomfortable with it. They go on about their business, and we take that as a rejection, and it's not often a rejection of us. I think that is a rejection of the intimacy that has to come after that. This is all coming from what you said.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
You said this, I thought this. So
yeah,
this is like
it's an
flowing out the way.
It's a rejection of intimacy. Absolutely.
And the more emotionally available a person is, I think that's going to, I don't want to say increase your chances, but it increases the quality of the relationship significantly because that person may not be willing to avoid, they may not have sex with you, but they're not going to avoid or invalidate your expression of your emotions for intimacy. someone who is emotionally mature, available, is going to at the very least be able to connect with you in that moment, because that's what we're desiring. We're desiring some level of connection, intimacy, and that's why we're extending this offer for it. If it may not come in the form of sex, because sex is one expression of intimacy and connection, there are plenty of other ways to connect with people and be intimate with one another.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we're also talking about we're talking about the other person, whether they want to meet us for intimacy, but the real question is, are we willing to be intimate? Okay, maybe we weren't ready for that. Now we have herpes and we're disclosing. That's a practice. It's not, if you weren't already doing that before, it's not like you're going to be good at it right away. And it's going to feel uncomfortable, and it's going to feel awkward, and it's going to take practice. Were you ready to be in a place to be that intimate with people before you have sex? Maybe not. Maybe you're not now. Can you get there? Absolutely. If you want to. But you have to see it as a practice. You don't just go out and play pro ball. You got to practice first.
And if you do, you might get hurt. you can't go out in the big leagues without practice.
But even if you do practice, you still might get hurt.
Yeah, injury prevention. And we can practice this intimacy with people who maybe we don't want anything from, or who we already have something with. So beginning to see if you can deepen your connection with coworkers, friends, family members, people who are already in your circle, that cashier that you see at the grocery store all the time, right? Like, I ain't saying shoot your shot with everybody. What I'm saying is allow for it to be a practice by extending a little bit of emotional vulnerability to a person.
You can also test your partners or your people who you want to disclose to.
Explain yourself.
With another intimate detail and see how they take that.
Oh. Like what? Because I
have a good example. I have a good example.
Okay.
So an intimate detail for me is my health, right? And so when I went on a first date a couple days ago, I'll go back to that. I had this really good way of being intimate without just being completely vulnerable. I spilled my guts on the table, right? And it was actually really cute because we like a few of the same shows. And so I would disclose a little bit. I'll be like, I have some health concerns. It definitely, it means that I have to live a certain lifestyle, a certain way, eat in a certain way. I move through the world a certain way. There's other details about that I might share with you, but I'm going to save that for season 2. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so then I got to see how they took the little bit of information that I gave them and processed it and responded to me. And I haven't disclosed to this person. I haven't even disclosed this person about, chronic pain with sex or any of that. But like, I still had a really great date and a really nice time and shared some nice, vulnerable details about myself. And I do think there's also this urgency that we have with dating. Like, oh, I need to know if this is the right person now. It's like, slow the fuck down and get to know somebody. Jesus. If you're dating.
If I don't sleep with them now, then they'll lose interest.
Exactly. And if so, then that's fine. I mean, maybe that wasn't the connection for you. Not everything is for you. Now, if you do want to just go out and have casual sex, you can still do that. And, there is that you have to get good at disclosure, but you got to practice first. That's it.
I think about how hard it is sometimes for people when a person is right there in front of you. You want to do everything right to not have to go through the process of getting a person right there.
How do you know what's right? You don't know what is in their head. You don't know what they're experiencing. There is no right and wrong. There's no way you will ever be able to get it right. People can be together for 10 years and still not get it right.
Oh, no, I don't mean get it right. I mean, like, it's there. Like, we will prioritize what's here right now in front of me because it's there, whether it is, even ignoring things that are incompatibilities. Let me say that. I've seen this.
Yeah, ignoring the red flags.
A lot of times, yeah. Where it's like, well, he's here. So what, he's expressing alternative political beliefs to me, expressed a religion I'm not into, expressed a kind of sex I'm not into, but he has a dog. So there's got to be some good in there somewhere. And this falls back into hope as well. Like, it's hope and not choice. Like, I will choose to hey, I know that these are things that are important to me, so I don't think that this is something that'll work out based on that. But we will tolerate, that person who's here because it's easier to just put up with whatever red flags. And that's not even an
Is
easy
that
thing to do.
is that hope or fear though?
That's fear. That is fear.
That's fear.
That's a fear.
I'm afraid I'm not going to find
man.
anybody else.
Okay, so it is very important here that we differentiate between being hopeful and being fearful. And is my action coming from a place of hope, or is my action coming from a place of fear?
Mm-hmm.
So using this scenario, let's say I'm on a date with someone and I know it's not going to work out, right? But that person's here. We spent all this time getting to know each other to this point of where we can get in front of each other. Nobody flaked. I had something else to do, but I canceled those plans. So I'm just going to go through with the day and make the most out of this experience. And I'm still going to try and I hope that I get the outcome I want, which might just be hooking up and then going on about our business, right? That person there is no longer seen as that person there. They're seen as a means to an outcome that I would want. So despite, whatever differences and compatibilities, that person there is who I am investing my attention, my energy, my time to, and money, because we're paying for a date, right? I'm giving this person all of these things right here, right now in front of me because they're there, rather than allowing, like, I probably knew before we even went on a date, right? Rather than just being like, hey, I don't think that this is going to work out. Because even that's a vulnerable thing to say.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. But
I'm trying to get somewhere. I don't know.
I know where you're. I kind of feel like I know where you're trying to go. But let's reframe that scenario. Instead of maybe you went through all this effort, you decide it's not going to be a right fit anyway, but maybe you just need practice disclosing, right? And that's all you can hope can expect from that. Like, I'm just going to use this as practice, right? I'm going to use this as practice. I'm going to, not everything has to be the thing. Not everything has to have some kind of, end game. Like, what can we reframe that to? What can I get out of this? If I know it's not going to really be a fruitful, long-term scenario already, is there value in me being here? What is that value? And can I put my hope towards that value? And if there is no value, then there's no value.
But isn't that coming back down to it just being transactional and what hookup culture is, right? So this is a transactional thing. I want practice disclosing.
What is the other person getting out of it too? Everything is transactional. What isn't transactional? Especially in capitalism. What isn't transactional?
I'm gonna find something.
Keep thinking.
Man. I was gonna say air, but it's like no, because we
bring out CO2.
Plants, yeah.
Right?
All right.
Plants give us air. I mean, everything is cohesive, right? Everybody has to any relationship is going to be transactional in some nature. It's not always going to be even. Sometimes one partner has to give 80% and somebody gives 20, and then, later it might be different, That's just sort of how it is. When, what kind of value are we getting out of this?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying be selfish and not think about the other person and their experience, but I do think, especially when it comes to people pleasing, we want to make things perfect so that this other person has this really great experience, and like, I'm going to go ahead and sacrifice some of my needs, and I'm going to be vulnerable, and I'm going to just hope that they meet me there because you know what I mean? Like, it's this people pleasing. And I hope that they mirror me back. But is that hope or is that fear? Your people pleasing is often based out of fear. It's actually manipulation, because you're not being your true authentic self. You don't give the other person the opportunity to see the real you and to meet you there. You're doing both yourself and the other person a disservice.
I can't help but think about we've spoken here about, the outcomes or the what the transaction is. Going back to just, is our behavior coming from a fear and we're responding in avoidance, or is this coming from a place of hoping and moving toward a desired outcome. The vulnerability piece. Go ahead, say that.
Okay, so I want to, like, because we're kind of, moving towards the second half, I want to talk a little bit about how that comes into acceptance, though, right? Because we're talking about grief, and the ideal situation is to move towards acceptance, right? So I would say that is self-compassion. Learning how to check in with ourselves and say, is this hope or fear? Is this, coming from fear or faith?
Yeah.
Right? That is self-compassion. And that is a big part of acceptance, of moving to a place of acceptance, is self-compassion. How do I be compassionate to myself, right? How do I tune into that? Because that's even a practice. There isn't, we aren't taught that. We aren't taught that as children. There's no self-compassion subject in school, even though there should be. A lot of us did not see that from our parents. We have to learn that as adults, to have self-compassion. I mean, if you were taught that as a kid, good for you, and highly jealous. But it's a practice, the same, that part of being vulnerable, engaging with reality as it really is, having mindful behaviors. What does checking in during a date look like for you? Is it pausing for a minute, taking a breath, and going to the bathroom and saying, do I really like this person? Like, what is it? Is it after the date, sitting down and journaling the things you liked and the things you didn't like, or the feelings that you're having after the date, or after the disclosure? Are you writing down how it went and how you felt about it? And writing is a good way to just process things. But moving into acceptance is looking at it. And looking at it is sometimes really uncomfortable, because we are, especially in capitalism, told not to look at our feelings, because if we did, we wouldn't work for 40 hours a week and like measly health benefits. You know what I mean? Like, we wouldn't do that. It's not beneficial for that to be sold to us.
I think about the better we get at doing this for ourselves, the better we can get at doing it alongside someone, which is, that's what we want. We want that connection. We want that intimacy, being able to be self-compassionate, be good enough, not for someone, but with someone. We want to be courageous with someone. We want to have pride with someone. And I'm looking at this sheet. Wisdom popped up, and I don't know if being wisdom with someone would have fit, or being wise with someone, but
Sharing.
I think that it speaks to being able to exchange experiences, perspectives, to be able to expand our own wisdom, and being able to learn from each other. Let's call it that, being able to learn from each other. But we can only do this if we are able to understand it. We are these pioneers of intimacy now. Like, I really love that you put it that way, because while, yeah, on one hand, herpes diagnosis is a burden, having to initiate that conversation, think about when we do and it goes well. I think about the messages I get when people are like, I had a great disclosure, it went so well. The reason that it went well isn't because the other person said, yes, I'll have sex with you. The reason that it went well was because someone did a hard thing. They were emotionally vulnerable to someone in a time where being emotionally vulnerable is not really always rewarded with reciprocity. It's often met with, again, assumptions, or someone being shut off, or ghosting, or someone just being like, nope, no thanks. It's not met with a curiosity or an intimacy. I had someone who disclosed to someone, and he had questions, and he was like, let me get tested. I want to learn more about this. I'm going to spend more time with you. And then when he got tested, he found out he didn't have it, and he later was like, hey, you're really amazing. I just don't think that I can go through with this. And all through the process, she let me know that this was a great disclosure because she did it. That was amazing. And that particular situation, because I'm sure people are probably wondering, or if you haven't, I'm going to share anyway. I would have wondered, okay, if he tested positive, then it would have just been like, oh, great, we can do this now. We don't have to be vulnerable here and really assess our compatibilities and everything. But him testing negative, how would it have felt for him to still want to move forward, but still be like, I don't know, right? So
Right. There's
the
so
win,
many reasons someone can reject someone or ghost someone that has nothing to do with herpes.
exactly. So the win in that is that we were able to, again, be a pioneer in extending that invitation for someone to emotionally connect with us.
And having pride in that, right? Having pride in just doing that. And having that sort of like ability to tolerate any emotions that come up afterwards, right? We can have mixed emotions. I can be prideful that I disclosed, and then also feel sad it didn't work out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's what we are. We're like walking, and our bodies are the avatars for the emotions that we feel, essentially. And while physically naked and rubbing up against each other, penetrating, being penetrated, whatever, this is probably the most physically close we can be. The depth at which we can be interconnected with someone on an emotional or energetic level is as seemingly infinite as we want for it to be, but there's a barrier there. There's a barrier of the fear of not just rejection, but also there's a fear of acceptance. You know, what happens if we
Yeah,
do
absolutely.
connect, right? Like, what if things go well? What if I'm met with reciprocity? Then we go into hoping that it lasts when, you know, nothing lasts for eternity, right? Or we can do this out of fear, or we can begin to get scared of like, oh my God, what if this doesn't last? What if I mess this up? How can I mess this up? I hope I don't mess this up. And we can do that. So I think that it's really key here to be present with the experience, you know ourselves, what it is that we are extending to people, be able to be self-compassionate with ourselves, be courageous enough to extend people invitations to connect with us at a deeper level than just what the limitations of the body have to offer.
I also want to just touch on good enough. Was that good enough of a disclosure? It doesn't have to be. What's perfect? What's a perfect disclosure? It doesn't exist, right? What is good enough? And I think that in our there's this also social script that we're not allowed to make mistakes, right? We're allowed to make mistakes. And if you're in any relationship, it doesn't matter what the committed level is, people are going to make mistakes, you know?
Yeah.
And what does that look like for you? Do you let yourself make mistakes? Do you let other people make mistakes? We got to be okay with it. And that comes back to shame. When we make a mistake, we carry all this shame, right? Or we want to say the other person made the mistake, so I don't have to have the shame. You know? Who's to blame? What's even a mistake anyway? It's subjective. I could say or do something, and I could think it's not a mistake, and you could think it is. You know?
And the more we practice trying to connect, you know, the more we begin to see that there are no mistakes. You know, we have experiences that we may label as losses, but these are all lessons. And then when we have wins, we ought to hold space for ourselves to be able to celebrate those and capture that feeling so that we can move toward more of that feeling in the way that it aligns with us.
And I want to touch a little bit on body grief here too,
Yeah.
because I am someone who has had sort of like a roller coaster of the way my herpes outbreaks have sort of manifested. And I think there are some people that might be in the same situation as well. So when I first was diagnosed, I had my first outbreak. It was like small, but it lasted like a really fucking long time. And I was like, oh my gosh, if all of my, outbreaks are like this is going to suck. Then I didn't have one for like, I didn't have another one until I had about maybe 4 or 5 months later, I had a hysterectomy. And after that hysterectomy, because that's like major trauma to that area of the body, I didn't have mine done laparoscopically. Mine was actually done vaginally. So like there was just a lot of like trauma right to that area. I was getting outbreaks every 7 days for probably 6 to 8 months. Every 7 days I got an outbreak. It was small, didn't bother me, but it was nonetheless there to remind me, every week. And I was like, I cannot believe that this is happening to me. Like, is this ever going to end? And one of the things that we can do to move into acceptance is move into this is how it is right now, right? I am now, I had my hysterectomy May of 2021. And now I only get outbreaks once every couple months. So it definitely changed, but it was like I was getting them every day for, it was like I always had one for like 8 months. It was felt very traumatic and very real. I feel like there's a big difference when you have herpes and you're not having outbreaks to when you have herpes and you are having outbreaks. Because when you are, it's like I'm constantly potentially exposing someone, and there isn't really a break, right? There wasn't a break for me to engage even if I wanted to, you know what I mean? Even though you can actually engage, there are other things you can do and ways to keep yourself safe. But, it changes, and moving into acceptance this is the way it is right now. And your herpes, the way herpes manifests in your body is going to be different. It may take time and it may change, right? Mine wasn't just like worse and got better. It was like it was fine and then it got really worse and then it, kind of started getting fine again. So there's that illusion of control too, right? I can't control these outbreaks. There is no, it is what it is. I show up. I can deal with whatever arises. I can wholeheartedly accept whatever arises. I'm strong enough. I'm capable enough to accept whatever arises, whether that comes to, you getting outbreaks or disclosing and facing rejection, right? I am here to handle whatever arises, and knowing that you are resilient enough to do that. Right? And giving yourself time and space to process and time and space to grow and change, whether that's physically or mentally.
Thank you. So wrapping this up, like I don't know that there's really a wrap up or a call to action necessarily, but bringing this whole thing back to one point, it's that, we're more than people with herpes. I really resonate with what you said about us initiating intimacy. And the work that, if you're listening to this podcast, the work that you've had to do or that you're about to start or that you're in the middle of, wherever you are in it, find some kind of peace in knowing that. Find some kind of peace in knowing that you're not disclosing your status. You're extending an invitation for emotional intimacy. You are inviting someone to connect with you at a level that is deeper than the body is able to allow, right? That little bit of time that you spend, sexually with someone, or however you physically share intimacy, compared to the depth of a connection when you're in each other's presence, away from one another, just sharing thoughts or having that person or the people in your mind or being in theirs. We initiate that shit, and for the opportunities where we don't initiate it, it is fucking pleasant. It is amazing to have someone offer that to you. And it ain't nothing like it. It's the scariest thing, yet the most rewarding thing, all at the same time. And just as we can be afraid of rejection and disappointment, we can also be equally afraid of success and the outcome that we do want. So understand, like, that same energy between being afraid or being hopeful, it's the same. It's the same intensity. So where we go back into choice is we can choose to direct that intensity toward the direction that we want to go in. Yeah. And hopefully we get that outcome. Hopefully we get that feeling.
Yeah, we can also choose to keep our eyes on our own paper And what I mean by that is, what is our mind doing, right? Faith or fear? Is this coming from faith or fear? Do I like this? Do I not like this? Or, like, and those are things that make good sex too, whether you have herpes or not, right? Keeping your eyes on your own paper is definitely going to help, because you're not disclosing because you necessarily, want to figure out what the other person is feeling. You should be disclosing sometimes to figure out what you're feeling. And if this person is someone that you feel good about being with, and what disclosing is doing for you, not necessarily what disclosing is doing for them, right? Like, they have their own paper to keep their eyes on, and we can keep our eyes on our own paper too.
That's it. That concludes this episode of Something Positive for Positive People. Please like, rate, review, share, subscribe to this podcast on whatever listening platform you are on. Please visit www.spfpp.org and check out the new website. Thanks, Jenny. And you can also figure out how to donate if you feel compelled to. Your support helps continue the maintenance and upkeep of what is Something Positive for Positive People, working towards continuing to provide these mental health resources and self-help resources for people who are navigating herpes stigma. Be on the lookout for the 2023 herpes survey. It is currently pending IRB approval. I hope to start distributing that in the month of March. Fingers crossed. I'm waiting. We finished the survey before Christmas. We sent it out for approval, and they're just really backed up with going through the paperwork process. So be on the lookout for that. And I'll catch y'all in another episode. Thank you.